So the ABCs of cyber risk prioritization, and those 4 areas I'm going to focus on for the session today are around managing our controls, the unknowns, the IP-based assets in our environment that that we are, maybe unaware of, things that pop up, things like TVs and Internet of Things type items which are in our network, and what the behaviours of those items are. Also, look at telemetry. That's something which we've covered before at SASIG. Important. So back on the list again for today. A little bit of some updated content to share with you about that. And I'm going to finish up with zero trust today. So making a start with managing controls. So, clearly we have a lot of investments in our environments of the controls that we purchase to secure our networks, our people, our resources. And those investments require updates, patches. The patching frequency is increasing these days. The features are being released by these security vendors very quickly. New features, enhanced features are all coming to the forefront, and we need to get those updates out as quickly as possible. And I don't think we argue with that fact at all. It's important to maintain the patching of those controls and keep up to date. I mean, you've probably all experienced when you've got problems with certain technology and you make a call to the vendors, the first thing they ask you to do is upgrade to the latest version. So it's definitely at the top of the card. We are doing our best to get those updates into place. But from our experience at Secrutiny, running managed services, we firmly believe that updating is really only part of the requirement. Making sure that everything is on a level playing field, running those latest versions. We focus a lot of attention on that. We target our IT operations people at doing that type of activity. A good advice I can give you really is that it's good for you to identify pilot groups of devices to test those new agents and controls before they go out to the wider fleet. So make use of the filters, AD groups and so on to go and target those tests. Make sure you've got a good acceptance test plan around those pilot groups and make sure things work for you before you go and affect the entire estate. But beyond those upgrades themselves, what we feel is important is checking where those controls are actually missing. The dashboards that we have for these products that we use today are really good at showing us the number of devices that are under management, the versions that are in use. They also show you devices which appear to be out of control, devices that are not connected to the management. And it's really important to not gloss over that bit of information. And we really firmly believe at Secrutiny that, push ahead with those upgrades, but make sure you follow those upgrade cycles with a view of what is in that state of not managed. It could be that you have agents out there which are on production live equipment that are not reporting into management. Potentially they are still providing control because they're agents that that can run without interaction with the management console, but they may be going out of date. They may, you may be blindsided to what they're not telling you. So it's important to export those lists out of those systems and find those gaps. But also not just relying on the tool itself. We live in a world where we rely so much on the dashboards that were presented to us by these vendors, but go and have a look at other ways that you can challenge the data that's in front of you. Auditing your environment for the controls that you've got, validating where those services exist. That's really important because it's those machines that either don't have the control or have a control in a substandard state that are really your problem. If you think about what happens in the real world when a vendor becomes aware of a new exploit, the very first thing that happens is that those vendors go back to their agent from, 6 months ago, 2 years ago, even 3 years ago, maybe beyond that. And the first thing they do is they validate that threat, that exploit against that old version of their agent. And, I wouldn't say 100% of the time, but in 99.9999% of the time, those vendors make a very clear statement that even if you would have been using their older product, they would have provided you a level of protection. So, what I'm trying to say is there is a safety net of sorts there. You can't rely on it 100%. I am saying that you do need to patch these products and keep them up to date, but it's I think the priority around applying these patches is going back and looking at the estate to find out where things are operating in a substandard way or where they are missing altogether, because those are the areas that give you those blind sides. We operate security managed services here at Secrutiny, and we take time to make sure that the elements which are under control or under management are correctly reporting in. And there are, it takes some effort to go back and check that. We know that none of these controls provide the silver bullet, but it's really important to go back and check where those controls are missing. So just closing up on this segment, really, I think the priority is looking for those control gaps, because that is your weakest point. It's not necessarily the outdated agent, but look to see where those controls are perhaps not functioning, not on the latest version, not and needing some assistance, because there's definitely a piece of work to be done after each of those update cycles. So moving on to the next segment, I wanted to cover off the unknowns. So unknowns in the environment. We tend to rely heavily on our configuration management tools in the estate to deploy our controls. Generally, they tend to follow Active Directory. We deploy our agents across all the devices that are part of the domain, because the configuration management tool is tied to the domain. And there are always, all of us have got in our environment, some devices which you can't get under control. So there are gaps. We know that there are devices that operate on our networks, IP-based devices sitting on the network, which perhaps don't have controls on them and are out of management. And we think that we know where these things are, but it's so easy to connect things up to the network these days. And it's important to get a view of what those devices are. So understanding where those unknowns are in the network requires some level of scanning of the network. It's possible to segment your network up so that you have zones to keep these things separated, and we trust that our security principles are strong enough to provide that level of control. But being able to take a step back and view the network, to scan the network and bring back that data is a pretty trivial thing these days. There's lots of open source tools that you can get hold of that can do it for you. Of course, there are lots of paid products as well, which you can buy into that will do this work for you. But the key thing is data, building up that data, building up those lists of the devices that are on your network. And alongside that is really having a good understanding of what's in your network, what you know of, having that list of, what are my critical assets in the environment, so that when you have those two sets of data, the information that the scanning tools can give you about the unknowns compared with what you know about your own network, it's a pretty simple join to have a look to see, from the vulnerability information that's coming from the scanning tools, are any of those unknowns participating in communication flows with my critical assets? So building up those lists is really important. Those tools these days are providing us good levels of fingerprinting, device classification. What are those devices? Are they TVs? Are they internet? Are they wireless access points, and so on? So getting that understanding of that classification is great. The more money you spend on those types of tools, the more they can enrich that data. So not only do they find the devices and classify them, they can also show you the traffic flows on those devices. It's all done passively these days. You can use spam ports in your network to go and get views of the traffic. You know, it's an expensive thing to try and to monitor all traffic, you know, north, south, and east and west. But definitely as a starting point, look at your north-south traffic. Deploy some kind of a spam port inside your, you know, on the south side of your internet gateway, and have a look to see everything communicating in and out, and use that lens to tune your scanning tools to map out all the IPs and the MAC addresses of those devices. You know, so there are good, simple things that we can take advantage of in the environment to go and get the type of visibility we need. Good tools that we can use to crunch that data and give us a view of the device as it finds. And then products which you can overlay with that data and that will give you that view of classification. But bringing all of that to a dashboard to give you a view of what's on the network. You know, what's the view of your known critical assets versus your unknowns? What's the view of the vulnerability within those unknowns? Can really help you to focus and, you know, start massaging out some of these items which are appearing on the network. You know, it may well be that you've got TVs in the environment which are wireless capable that are joining the wireless network. It could just be that something's been implemented in a meeting room. It's got a network port in it, and someone's connected it up. But there's no real need for that to be on your network. So as long as you get that visibility of what those unknowns are, you can start to make some decisions about how you can attack those and how you can close down those gaps and get more control within your network. So the takeaway on the unknowns really is that you need to get familiar with your network. You need to know what you own, what is the normal operating baseline of the network, where your assets are, you know, understanding the rogue devices that appear in the network. And when you've got that data, being able to produce a dashboard. I mean, this is just something I've mocked up here on the slide, but getting that view that you check and you make it part of your weekly routine to just have a look at that data. You know the number of critical assets you've got in the environment, having some indication of how many of those are available out of however many you know that are on the network is a useful metric to watch. Looking at the vulnerabilities of those assets as well is a good way of getting some focus and prioritizing how you deal with what you know. But on the flip side of that rogue assessment as well, the number of devices that don't really participate in the day-to-day working of what you're doing, but knowing what they are, knowing the numbers of them, knowing how they're classified by device type is a great first place to be at, first base to be at, to understand what's in your environment. Okay, moving on from the unknowns, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about telemetry. So I've covered telemetry before within SASIG, and I've gone into some detail about the types of telemetry that's available to us today. Today I'm going to just hammer down on some of those same points, but really the takeaway from today really is that there is a wealth of data around us with telemetry. It's everywhere. Our network appliances, our switches, our firewalls, our routers, they all provide some logging capability. And those vendors that provide those types of networking equipment are getting smarter and smarter. They are now beginning to review the data which they're holding about what they've discovered through the traffic flows against threat intelligence feeds and so on. And all of that information is starting to appear in the logs. So not only are you getting a view from firewalls about where traffic is going from and to, but you're also getting risk indicators of whether that traffic is deemed to be anomalous, whether it's communicating with something it's never been seen before. That is all appearing in the log. So my point is that this data, this log data, which we casually just sometimes pick it up and just keep it aside because we might want to go back to that at some point, is definitely being enriched. And if you can pick that data up and aggregate it together with other sources, you are the owner of a really rich data set, which with the right crunching can really enlighten you as to what's happening in your network. I want to talk to you a little bit about those other types of data as well. we covered this last time as well, but in endpoint data, we've certainly made a move at Secrutiny, from collecting beyond the usual set of data that we were after. The endpoints represent a real wealth of information. You can have all the control tools in the environment and you'll get all the alerts from them to tell you that they've blocked something. But, always keep in mind that statement about there's no silver bullet. An EPP control that's telling you that it's quarantined something, it's great. It's a warming feeling to know that the control you've bought has done the right thing and it's working. But you do need to check the bases. Infection happens on devices at many stages. There can be first level, second level infection and so on. And EPP controls, sometimes miss that first stage. Sometimes they miss the second stage, or they miss part of that conversation. And there's a wealth of telemetry that builds up at the endpoint. If you capture those event logs from devices, you can start to get a bit of a view as to how efficient your control is. I'm not saying that that's telling you that the control is deficient. Perhaps you just haven't turned on all the features within the control. Perhaps you haven't really taken the time to go and have a look at all the new features that are coming from these vendors. Like I said at the start, they are new features being introduced on they're coming at us at quite a speed these days. But collecting data from endpoints is absolutely vital, we believe at Secrutiny. And beyond the standard Windows event logs, I'd advise you to consider looking at the sysinternal sysmon. Sysmon is a great source of data. When you enable that on your endpoints, it's something which you can do in a very simple way. You can enable it through the domain, install that service, and it just runs. It's really lightweight, and it produces another set of log data. And some might argue that the sysmon data alone is richer than all of the other notifications or alerts that you get in the standard Windows event logs. It's richer in the sense that the people have taken, the sysmon people have taken time to go and classify their rules. You'll be well aware of the MITRE attack framework and all the tactics and techniques that are used. All of those have T-number codes. We're beginning to see in all of the vendors we use that there is a view of all of the alerts and all of the notifications that they are providing in the tools layered against the MITRE attack framework. And sysmon is doing just the same thing, collecting useful information. An example would be, process hollowing and showing you where perhaps Outlook might be running, and Outlook spawns a PowerShell process. And then that activity, also having the MITRE T numbers associated with it, means that it's another really good enrichment of endpoint data. So if you aggregate all of that data and bring it back to a central point, you can do all of that really in a trivial way these days. There are vendors out there. Splunk allows you to operate their product for free up to a certain point. Elasticsearch has got products out there which are open framework products, essentially. You can use a lightweight log shipper to sit on your endpoints that picks up those events as they're occurring locally, and you can bring them through to an Elastic cluster, which you could host on premise. There are some takeaways from the NCSC site about how to do this kind of logging. There's some really good information there, which you can go to. I'll make sure I put a link for that in the chat at the end. But they talk about using these products that I've mentioned here. So, open framework products that you can put into place very easily, very quickly to collect up a set of information. And once it's aggregated, that data within those tools can be visualized. They have got pre-built dashboards ready for you to consume. And then once you've got your head around some of that information, you can go further. There may be custom software that's running in your environment that's critical to the environment, and you might want to model that. You could specifically look for those processes, those network communications, and you can bring that kind of information to a dashboard. So telemetry still remains a really important piece for us at Secrutiny, and we think that everyone should be doing some of this. If you can't cover the entire estate at least consider doing this for your critical assets within the environment. You know, I've said it already, but for us, the endpoint contains the gold. You really can challenge your the way you are currently configured, or it may be that you've got a control which you may be wanting to change. Maybe you know already that it's deficient in some of the capabilities it's offering you. And when you've got this kind of telemetry data, you can solidify your argument to get your budget signed off. And I've given you an example of a typical Elastic dashboard here. This is something that straight off the bat, once you've got that data flowing into something like Elasticsearch, you can use Kibana to show some of these dashboards straight off the bat. So really important to try and get into the collection of some of this data. And specifically, we feel the endpoint data, there is a wealth of information there to get hold of. Okay, the last thing I wanted to talk to you about today was zero trust. Zero trust, that's a buzzword, isn't it? Crikey, I think through lockdown last year, working in my little office at home, every vendor, I think, on the planet had some sort of play around zero trust, without the huge numbers of our users working from home and what they're accessing and how they're accessing it. That really fired the zero trust conversation, didn't it? I think where I want to start with zero trust today is that it's a buzzword, in my opinion. Zero trust has been around for a long time. It's in most of the tech that we've got today. It's just been called a different thing, right? It's just now the marketing machine has got behind zero trust. You don't have to go out and buy zero trust. You've got it. You've got it in many of the things around you today. If you consider that today we are authenticating our users to everything, right? It's a good thing. We've been adding MFA to those authentication workflows, and you could consider that as kind of zero trust version 1, if you like, just adding MFA into those authentication flows. But in fact, if you think about it, layering any kind of checks over the top of the point of access, so wherever people are trying to access the network, if you can apply any kind of logic, you can essentially apply zero trust to your environment. So, some of the technologies I've listed out on the slide here. So, UEBA, user entity behavior analytics, looking at authentication workflows of our users, identifying what is anomalous compared to a baseline. That gives you a really good view. It allows you to risk score your users, to know who in the environment is doing peculiar things. Those sorts of products are becoming more and more popular as well, side by side with UEBA, really, but all about looking at how authentication is taking place. And these products have got policy engines within them. And I think we need to make more use of them. We need to go beyond the visibility that these products are giving us about the weird and wonderful, and actually using them to extend our defenses and provide some controls. So when you see a user that is doing, is accessing something that is outside of their baseline, perhaps something they're accessing it from at a time of day which is unusual, they don't normally communicate with that, or they've never communicated with that. More than just being able to drive an alert out from that kind of behavior, how about taking control of it? How about having a policy engine which notifies the administrator, or which introduces an MFA type workflow? So I've got perhaps an administrator making an RDP connection to a server. It's gone 6 o'clock at night. It's an unusual activity. Let's challenge that user. Let's introduce MFA to it. So you can introduce zero trust in that kind of way. The MFA products that we use them today as well, they go far beyond just adding a second factor to authentication. These MFA products they're assessing a multitude of things when our users are connecting today. They can see the types of browser you're using to connect with. They can do some pretty rudimental device checks, validating it's a corporate device and so on. These are all features we've had for a long, long time, right? We've been using SSL VPNs with those kind of checks. We call them HIPS checks, right? Those kind of things have been around us for some time. But we can really make use of that information, and we can set policies up to provide that for us. Secure web gateway or proxy today. When we access our web content, there is a lot of capability at the proxy these days. It goes way beyond what we used to do with categorizing content and allowing users to the things that are categorized or not categorized. In proxy today, you can assess what people are connecting to. If they're connecting to Office 365, is it your Office 365 or is it a personal Office 365? You can see the types of activities that the user is involved with. Are they uploading? Are they downloading? Are they viewing? All of that is known to our proxy services today. And all of that is available to you through those policy engines in those products. EPP and EDR can also give you a view on zero trust. When we are seeing users accessing some devices or things that are anomalous, some of those EDR capabilities are coming to the front there. So what can we do with that, really? Around privilege as well. That's important. Getting a view on who our administrators are, getting a view on what they're accessing, logging all of that information is useful. And some of those tools available today can provide us sorry, good time for my phone to ring. Some of those tools can provide us that kind of just-in-time access. You're seeing that today if you're using Azure, if you're using any of those cloud-based services, when you're trying to access those VMs, there is conditional access involved there, which allows you to provide just-in-time access. Where's this user coming from? Are they from a trusted network? Before they make that connection to that resource, you're validating it. That is essentially zero trust. So it's everywhere. It's in everything we've already got. And there are certainly some vendors which are flying that flag and have got a complete solution. But you don't need to look beyond what you've already got. First of all, you've got a lot of it already in the environment. So I think my closing point on zero trust is to have a look at the capabilities and make sure that you can use those policy engines to challenge your users at the point of access, and layer in those policies to look for those different attributes and use them in the policy, right? Look at the times of day that people are connecting and the locations they're connecting from, potentially even the assets. I mean, the list goes on. The different vendors have got different elements of that to allow you to write those policies. So those were the 4 areas I wanted to cover today. If I can take any questions at this point, you can do that over the chat, and I'll be happy to answer them for you.
Okay, so please post your questions in the chat. While we're waiting, Deep, I've got one for you. Is the last 18 months, the world has changed beyond all recognition. We used to have a challenge of managing our endpoints anyway. Now those endpoints are in our people's homes. Has that, how do we cope with that?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, the number of devices that are connecting remotely, and everyone's doing a working day from home. Things are definitely simpler when you have these kind of always-on VPNs. People that fire up a laptop, and that as soon as the machine's been authenticated and the user is authenticated, you can capture the telemetry from those devices. A little bit more challenging when users don't have those type of VPNs, those kind of manually fired VPN connections, but still running those agents, they will cache the information locally, and when they do see the network, they can pass the information in. At Secrutiny, we are starting to build out more of our cloud architecture so that these managed environments that we operate in, it's possible that the servers, of course, are on the network. Their agents are collecting the data and sending that to the aggregation point. But those remotely connected devices that perhaps aren't on those always-on VPNs, if the configuration of the log shipping agent is holding two destinations, both the central aggregation point and perhaps a cloud aggregation point. It's possible to make sure you get that telemetry in real time, just like you would do normally. The other thing to mention, I guess, is that these aggregation points, you know, I've talked to you today about, you know, extending the amount of logs that you're bringing in. You know, there are some concerns out there about that data and when it resides on site, and how risky is that when, you know, potential ransomware attacks could be affecting disk volumes which are presented within the network. And, you know, a shift that is happening right now is that these aggregation points or systems of record, it's becoming more common now to be thinking about placing those aggregation points in the cloud. So by that virtue, those machines that aren't on those always on VPNs will always be able to see the cloud if they're turned on and they're internet connected, and they can be sending the data up into the cloud. We can talk to you at length on that, really. I didn't want to fill the conversation today with that, but Secrutiny's got a good handle on that. Yeah. We've definitely got some new content to talk to the market about this summer in that space, but I'd happily take the details, and anyone who's interested in that, give us a ring.
Well, it sounds like it's a subject for a future webinar.
Oh, possibly, yeah.
Right, we've got one question from Emily. So, so how do you passively monitor the network?
Okay, right. So, that, you know, picking up that information about the unknowns in the network. It's as simple really as spam ports. That's, you know, your switches, everyone's switches has got that capability. Create a spam port and then use the bit of software that I talked about. We tend to, when they're deployed, we call those probes, and you make sure that the probe has visibility or has connectivity to that spam port. That's how we get that view of traffic. I mentioned that you know, it's quite a lot of information to watch, to passively monitor, but definitely start by looking at the north-south traffic to start off with. East-west is great if you can start to get a view of what's communicating between hosts in the network. That's really good, but you would need to consider perhaps more of a fabric to deal with that, some kind of port aggregation type technology, because the data volumes goes up incredibly when you start looking east-west. But, you know, there are definitely use cases for it, and I think I said in the presentation to, you know, get that initial view, and then definitely get some view at your criticality. You know, those critical servers in your environment might need that kind of monitoring. There's nothing, you know, these kind of monitors, these probes you can put in for very little money, and just set up a dedicated one to do that one east-west monitoring of those 10 servers in that critical server farm. Maybe that's a good way to handle that.
Okay, great.